All right, hopefully you were able to spin up concurrently and your result is exactly the same, where every time you make change in the server, we're listening for that as well as the front end, but we're not done with the setup when it comes to a front end and a back end. So effectively, the way we'll build our application, we'll be setting up the logic on a server, and then in our React application, we'll be making requests. But there's a big gotcha right now, and that is the simple fact that even though we have a server running as well as the front end, since both of them are on separate servers, we won't be able to communicate between the two. And technically, this video is optional. You don't have to code along since I'll remove the code anyway, but it's very important for me to showcase the problem. And then in the next video, I'll show you possible solutions and the one that we'll use. And let's just start very simply by navigating to server.js. And let's try to remember that we have this dummy route, correct? So we have app.get and then we send welcome. Now, what do you think is going to happen if I'm going to go to localhost 5000? And this is not a trick question. I mean, we should see the welcome, correct? Unless you, I don't know, don't have the browser running or whatever. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. So let's also set up the dummy route over here. Again, if you don't want to, you don't have to do this, but it's very important for me to showcase everything in great detail so that way you understand for your future projects. And I'm just going to set up the dummy route. Again, I'm going to remove it in a second and all that. And in here, what I want to do is just take this localhost, because remember the URL is /API, and that's not the gotcha here. I simply want to go here with get, I want to send, and yep, I have the welcome. And I'm not going to save this route. This is just for demonstration. But here comes the trick question. If I set up a fetch request in the dashboard page, or any of the pages for that matter, that's not the trick part. But what do you think is going to happen? Well, there's only one way to find out, correct? So let's go to the dashboard. And I'm going to start by getting my use effect. So I'm going to say here, import, then use effect. Now that one is coming from React. And then let's set up the function. Let's set up fetch data. And even though eventually we will use Axios, we'll install everything because it's going to be very useful as we're progressing with the application. For now, again, this is just for demonstration. So let's just use fetch. Again, that's not the trick part. So let's say here fetch data is equal, not date. Fetch data is equal to a sync. Then we have function, and then inside of the function body, let's go with const response. And that one is equal to await. Fetch is built in, so we don't need to do anything. And now let's grab localhost 5000 because I'm just too lazy to type that out. So let's pass in the string. Okay, good. And now let's go with const, and then data is equal to await. And remember, we needed to run a response and JSON. And then at the very end, we'll go with data. And now I'll utilize my use effect, where I'm just going to say once the application spins up, basically once I navigate to the dashboard page, well, then I want to invoke it, correct? And since I only want to do that when the component mounts, kind of makes sense if I set up my dependency array, and that's just going to be an empty array. And then inside of my callback function, let's go with fetch, and we're going to go with fetch data in this case. So let's save it. And what you'll notice that we're going to get big fat error. Now, technically, we can make an argument that it is because we didn't set up try catch, but keep in mind, this will only make sure that our application doesn't break. We still won't be able to access the data. So in here, let's go with error, like so. Let's save it. And yes, our application works, but I hate to break it to you, we don't have access to the simple, silly hello. Why? Well, I'll talk about it in the next video, but hopefully this is clear that unless we make some changes to our application, this is not going to work simply because both of our applications are living on the separate servers. So we have one localhost 5000, one localhost 3000, and then in the next video, I'll cover what are the solutions and also what is going to be approached at the very, very end once we push this up to a production.